Florida and Texas are backing away from the American Bar Association requirement, and now the same organization that spent decades enforcing the LSAT is going LSAT optional. And so when states stop deferring to the American Bar Association and the ABA itself starts distancing from the LSAT, it tells you one thing. The old gatekeeping model is breaking. And if you're studying for the LSAT without understanding that shift, you're playing yesterday's game with today's stakes. Now, if you've been paying attention to law school news lately, you've probably seen the headlines: Florida drops the ABA requirement, Texas drops the ABA requirement, and almost overnight, LSAT forums and group chats all explode with the same question. Does the LSAT even matter anymore? Do I still need to go to an ABA accredited law school? And is law school about to get cheaper, faster, and easier? Now, here's what I want to say right away before people go too far with this. This is not the earthquake people think it is. But if you misunderstand what just happened and you make decisions based on emotion instead of strategy, you could make one of the most expensive mistakes of your life. So let's slow this down and get a little bit more precise here. There are three things you've got to understand. First, what actually changed? Second, what did not change at all? And third, why being early here is much riskier than being late. Because the law is not a profession that rewards speed or experimentation. In fact, it rewards the opposite. It rewards caution. It rewards following precedent, and it rewards following paths that are already proven to work. Now let's start with exactly what recently changed. Both Florida and Texas removed the rule that you must graduate from an ABA accredited law school in order to sit for the bar in those states. That is it. That is the full extent of the change. Now let's talk about what this does not mean. It doesn't mean that ABA degrees suddenly lost value. It doesn't mean that top law schools are changing admission standards. And it doesn't mean that employers are updating their hiring filters. And it definitely does not mean that the LSAT is obsolete. What happened here is not the creation of a new system. It is the removal of exclusivity. In other words, those states will now recognize other accrediting bodies someday. But just because they're allowing this doesn't mean there is the infrastructure in place to support it. In other words, there is no new accreditor replacing the ABA yet. There is no alternative system with proven outcomes. There is no established pipeline from law school classroom to clerkship to getting a job. There's only the vaguest hint of an idea that something else could exist in the future. And this distinction here matters more than almost anything else. One of the first mistakes I'm already seeing, less than a month after the changes were announced, is students treating these headlines like a green light to take a shortcut. Law is not a profession of shortcuts. I'm sorry to tell you it's not. When you go to law school, you're not just buying classes or earning a JD. You're trading 3 full years of your life. You're spending 6 figures in tuition plus living expenses. And you want to maintain geographic flexibility. And all of this is meant to give you a credential that opens doors. So the real question isn't, can I technically become a lawyer some other way, like Kim Kardashian skipping law school in California, taking the apprenticeship route? The real question is, what doors will still be open to me afterward if I take this path or that path? And that is where ABA accreditation still matters enormously. For decades, ABA accreditation has functioned as a national signal of trust. Is it perfect? Definitely not. Is it expensive more than it should be? Absolutely. And yes, it could also be improved. But it is understood. Judges, law firms, clerkship committees, government employers, state bars, they all understand it as an established pathway to the JD, to bar accreditation. So replacing a national standard with nothing else yet is not a good move for you as a student. You're entering a vacuum of accreditation, and vacuums get filled very slowly in the institution of legal education. In the meantime, you are the one who absorbs the risk. And every major structural shift creates early adopters. And early adopters, unfortunately, always end up paying more. Uncertainty and opportunity cost in taking on risk. And unfortunately, there is often regret associated here. And if some new accreditor eventually emerges, and that's a big if, somebody is going to be in that first graduating class. But the problem is that class is not going to have any alumni network. Employers will not be familiar with that new credential. There's not going to be any long-term bar passage data. And if things go sideways, student loans aren't disappearing. You don't want to be 5 years out explaining why your degree is technically valid, but practically limiting, especially when the traditional path was still available when you applied. Now, let's talk about the LSAT, because I know people want this to be the moment where the LSAT stops mattering. Nobody likes studying for it, but the reality is, if you're applying to ABA accredited law schools, and that still includes virtually every reputable school in the country, nothing's changed. Admissions committees still rely on the LSAT. Scholarships are still heavily LSAT driven, and rankings still reward LSAT medians. If anything, uncertainty makes strong signals more valuable, not less. And when institutions feel instability, they don't abandon metrics. In fact, they cling to the ones they trust. So if you were hoping these headlines meant you could aim lower, you could prep less, or you could skip the LSAT entirely, that hope is misplaced. But the upside is this: the LSAT is still the biggest lever you control in this entire process. It's the fastest way to get into better schools, to get more scholarship money, and to reduce your long-term financial risk. Now, let's talk about prestige, because this is where people really misunderstand how the law works. Prestige does not disappear overnight because of a court ruling in one or two states. It erodes slowly over decades, if it erodes at all. Law is conservative in the literal sense. Law values precedent, hierarchy, longevity, and predictability. That's why top law schools aren't dropping ABA accreditation, and mid-tier schools can't afford to, which leaves us with the lower-ranked schools, many of which already struggle with employment outcomes and bar passage rates. Employers are not eager to gamble on unfamiliar credentials. Even if Florida and Texas, by the way, they implicitly acknowledge this by continuing to emphasize bar passage rates and employment outcomes. And so the standards, if they're going to be effectively the same, why change the label? It really comes down to politics and virtue signaling. And politics, these debates, they don't pay your student loans. Now, the average cost of law school is roughly $84,000 per year. So over the course of 3 years, we're talking roughly $250,000. Now, imagine attending a law school approved in only one state. What happens if your spouse gets a job elsewhere? What happens if your family member gets sick and needs you in another state? What happens if your practice area changes? Lawyers move and lives change all the time in unpredictable ways, and over the course of 3 or 4 decades, you can't predict what's going to happen in your life. But when you go to an ABA accredited law school, you've got portability of your degree. In other words, you can still sit for the bar in another state. But if you remove that and go to one of these new law schools in Florida or Texas where the JD is not portable in the same way, that's a pretty risky bet. Now, these changes could eventually pressure the system to innovate and lower costs, possibly, but these are long-term, unpredictable effects. They're not going to help you applying this year or next. Now, right now, ABA accredited schools still dominate hiring, clerkships, and federal opportunities. So the incentives have not meaningfully shifted. And so if you're choosing between a respected ABA accredited law school and a cheaper, untested alternative, you may not be saving any money at all. You may be just taking on more risk. And that risk gets expensive fast if you struggle to pass the bar or you get screened out of jobs. So the real cost you're taking on is the opportunity cost. And so the calm, rational move here is pretty simple. You want to double down on what you can control by maximizing your LSAT score, targeting strong, established schools, and thinking long-term. There's no prize for being first here, being the guinea pig in one of these new untested law schools. And so until the hiring market actually changes its behavior, the smart move here is to take the LSAT seriously, get into the best school you can with as much scholarship money as possible. And if you'd like my help getting into the best law schools possible, getting as much scholarship money as you can, reducing your debt, opening up your options, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That is an open offer for everybody watching this now or later. Happy to meet with you personally, help you craft your plan of attack for whenever you're taking the LSAT, whether it's April, June, August, or beyond. Happy to meet with you and help you talk through your LSAT action plan. I see some questions here in the chat. I will get to as many of those as I can. Just scanning through here. I see A is asking, what resources do you recommend? So for LSAT prep, there are a lot of different resources out there. There's books, there's on-demand courses, there's small group classes via Zoom, there's private one-on-one coaching. At LSAT Unplugged, we offer all of the above, but we always like to personalize your coaching program to help you achieve your goals on your time frame, because taking the LSAT in 2 months versus 4 months requires different plans. Improving by 10 points versus 30 points requires different plans as well. And so if you want to book that free lesson with me, we could talk through what your plan could look like. One thing I'd recommend against, though, are the prep books on Amazon, because they're oftentimes outdated. They often contain mistakes, not using real LSAT questions, and some of them are AI generated, and still think that logic games is on the test, for example, when it's been off the test for over a year and a half. But if you want to talk through particular resources, I'm happy to give you my take on them. I see Holly's asking, I need a 170 desperately. I have trouble with the 35-minute sections. Okay, so assuming that your accuracy is already pretty high, roughly 80% or so, then it's totally reasonable to switch gears and focus on pacing, time management, and then endurance, of course. If your accuracy is below 80%, though, I would recommend raising that and targeting particular weak areas. And so if there's a certain LSAT question type, like logical reasoning or reading comp, or within logical reasoning, you've got roughly 15 different types of questions like strengthen, weaken, flaw, parallel, resolve, and so on. If you're noticing trends in particular question types, you might want to drill those. If you're noticing certain methods of reasoning like correlation causation or confusing necessary versus sufficient conditions, you might want to work on that particular type of reasoning. Assuming you're good there, we move on from accuracy and drilling and foundational work into timing and pacing. The time constraint is pretty severe, of course, so it's totally normal to struggle with solving the questions in the time allotted. As a general rule of thumb, I recommend starting off with trying to solve the first 10 questions in roughly 10 minutes or so. In other words, you solve the first 10 questions faster because they're easier on average. The questions get harder as the section goes on. So if you can build up a time bank doing the earlier ones faster, you'll then have the more time for the tougher ones that truly need the additional time. So then on the harder ones, you slow down so that you have sufficient time to solve them. If you notice a particularly difficult one, you flag it, you skip it, you come back later. Then once you're good on pacing, we then move on to full-length timed exams to work on your endurance so that you don't get fatigued by section 4 just because it is section 4. And I see, Holly, you're saying you've got roughly 6 months to take it, so you're taking it in August, I'm guessing. You've got plenty of time to work on all of these areas. Accuracy with drilling, pacing with timed sections, endurance with full exams. And so you could spend the next couple of months just on pacing and drilling your weak areas, and then you'll have maybe 3 months to work on just full exams. I would recommend as a default doing 1 exam per week over the last couple of months if you're working or in school. If you have the liberty to do nothing but study for the LSAT full-time, even better, you could then do 2 timed exams per week and also make sure, of course, that you're allowing sufficient time to review your mistakes in depth. And for anybody watching this, you could work on pacing and endurance leading up to the June LSAT with August as a backup. I love that plan, by the way, because then you can retake in August if necessary and apply as soon as applications open in September. Or I see Holly saying she's actually taking it in September. So in that case, you've got yet another month to take it. Scores come back end of September, and you're still applying the first month that applications open. So plenty of time to cover all of these areas. At LSAT Unplugged, what we do is we craft for you a personalized study plan laying out exactly what to do. We use a 5-phase approach, ideally. It's the LASER approach to LSAT prep. LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. It's the cornerstone of our courses and our coaching programs. Learning is building a proper foundation, learning the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. We typically cover this in our private one-on-one coaching sessions as well as in our on-demand course. Then moving on from L for learning, we do A for accuracy, drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. Then we do S for sections, individual timed 35-minute sections to work on pacing. Then we have E for exams and endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests. And finally, R for review, using the Socratic review method. Now, review is too often overlooked, too often neglected, but it's actually, in my view, the most important phase of studying because until you can understand what you're getting wrong and why you're getting it wrong, you may end up just making the same mistakes again. And so we slow you down in the coaching, asking you a series of guiding questions to help you get to the root cause of the mistakes you're making and why. So we look at, for example, was your mistake coming from the argument, from the question stem, or from the choices? If it was in the choices, was it a tempting wrong answer that led you astray? Was an unappealing right answer that encouraged you or trapped you? And so if we can get down to the root cause in your process, we can course correct, adjust your step-by-step approach, and then we can help you avoid making the same mistake again using that Socratic dialogue where you're actually the one doing most of the talking. Because if you just watch an explanation video or look at the answer key, it's far too easy to say to yourself, oh, I get it now. How could I have been so dumb? But then you just end up making the same mistake again. And so if you're looking for support adopting this sort of process for your own studying, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally. The link to book it is unpluggedprep.com/start. Links below the video, pinned in the chat, in my bio as well. Again, that's unpluggedprep.com/start. Happy to meet with anyone watching this now or later. Happy to help you craft your plan of attack and help you reach your LSAT goals whenever you're taking it. Now I'll scan through here for some other questions coming in. Let's see, Alice is asking, what are the patterns in the answer, perhaps? Possibly. I mean, there are patterns throughout the LSAT, right? You've got patterns in how the argument is constructed. You've got patterns in the wording of the question stem. You have patterns in how LSAC makes wrong answer choices tempting and how they make right answers unappealing. So you have these traps of encouragement towards the wrong answer and traps of discouragement away from the right answer. And everybody has patterns in the mistakes they personally are making. And the trick here is figuring out what are the patterns in your mistakes personally. The problem with explanation videos or written ones is that they're one size fits all, and there's someone else's perfect way of solving the questions, oftentimes with the hindsight bias of already knowing the correct answer, which in my view is kind of cheating. And we really want to personalize the explanation to you because you're going to be the one who's there on test day. We can't take it for you. So we've got to give you the confidence and the clarity and the skill to perform for yourself when it truly matters. And for that reason, we ask you a series of guiding questions to help you get to the root cause of your mistakes so you can avoid them when it truly counts. Now, there are also patterns in the methods of reasoning LSAC uses, for example, like correlation, causation, or confusing necessary and sufficient conditions. And so the more you can spot the patterns in the methods of reasoning, the better your muscle memory will be, so that when you see a new question on the test, you can automatically and perhaps even subconsciously relate it back to an argument you've seen in the past. And that's one way that you can solve questions faster because you've been down that road before. Happy to elaborate more in a personal conversation if you want to get down to the root cause of the mistakes that you're making. I see Alyssa and Sid are very interested in these patterns here, so feel free to book the call with me, and we could talk through it more. But I wouldn't say that we're really memorizing the patterns here. The LSAT's not the sort of test where you're cramming for it or memorizing things by rote. It's really more, can you understand the patterns of the test? Because they're going to show up in different contexts with different window dressing. So you want to be able to strip away the surface level topic, like whether it's climate change or heart disease or dinosaur extinction or car accidents, whatever it might be. Can we get down to the root underlying logic of the argument? Or in reading comprehension, by the way, same deal. The passages have their own underlying skeletal reasoning as well, and the patterns and how those are structured. And so we help you disentangle or deconstruct all of that to understand the core logic as well. I see Gabrielle is asking, I graduate from graduate school in 2 years. How would you prep in the meantime? Well, the truth is that I don't think you actually need 2 years to study for the LSAT. You should be able to knock it out in maybe 6 months, maybe a year maximum. You can certainly do it in less time if you devote the proper time to it. But the method I would adopt is that laser approach I mentioned. So learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. By the way, folks, if you want to watch the recording of this live or any of the previous lives I've done, there's hundreds of them at this point. You can go into the link in my bio and you'll see the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel. On the live tab, there's all the lives. And then on the videos tab, I have plenty of videos beyond the lives covering every section, every question type, study schedule strategies and such, and we can also talk through it personally as well. But basically, when you've got anything more than 6 months, you can really take a nice, slow and steady approach. You could even take a couple of exams and just do them untimed to familiarize yourself with the methods of reasoning, the different question types. Even just doing a couple hours of studying a week and ramp it up as your test gets closer. For those of you out there who are pre-LSAT, a great book is a rule book for arguments. It's not an LSAT specific text, but it is a good way to get familiar with the types of arguments that the LSAT is testing you on. So when I mentioned correlation, causation, ad hominem, necessary, sufficient, confusion, all of that's covered there. The fundamentals of logic, really. And then when you're ready to get serious, maybe a year out, you could start doing more LSAT specific questions and materials. And of course, listening to the LSAT Unplugged podcast, watching the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel, you'll get a lot more of the nuts and bolts on of LSAT and admissions. I see Kanav Segal's asking thoughts on GRE versus LSAT in 2026. So the GRE has gotten a lot of headlines, but the truth is that it's actually declining in popularity. Last year, for example, you had 41,000 people get into law school with the LSAT. And I think it was roughly 400 or 1% of that number getting in with the GRE. So 1% versus 99.9%, it's really an insignificant drop in the bucket. Law schools like to indicate that they are holistic and very open to different pipelines of applicants, but the data tells a very different story. And this is all reflected in the official data. You can see this on the American Bar Association website. It's not just me saying it. The hard numbers tell you that the LSAT's the main game in town. Additionally, it's not just about getting into law school, it's also getting in with good scholarship offers, right? And one reason why law schools like the LSAT is because it's more strongly correlated with first-year grades, bar passage rates, employment outcomes, all of which law schools are very heavily evaluated on, both to maintain their ABA accreditation and also to raise their standing in the US News rankings. So if you want to not only get into the best schools, but also get more scholarship money, the LSAT's going to be the best way to do that. I see Alex is asking, should I take a gap year to study or study for the LSAT while in senior year of undergrad? So there's pros and cons to each course of action, right? On the one hand, if you take the LSAT in senior year of undergrad, you get to go straight from undergrad into law school. So it's a more direct, smoother path path, no gap year. You're in a more academic mindset while you're studying for the LSAT, and you get to be a lawyer a year sooner, which means 1 year less of not being a lawyer and 1 year more of being an attorney, earning an attorney's salary, presumably higher earning, higher income, right? In contrast, though, if you're not sure whether law school is right for you, you can take a gap year, explore law, maybe work as a paralegal, get some more real world legal exposure. You also give yourself more time to study for the LSAT, maybe more time to raise your LSAT score going with stronger numbers. So I guess the question is, can you achieve your fullest potential on the LSAT, taking it sooner and studying for it while in undergrad or maybe the summer prior to senior year? Or do you need the time post undergrad to give yourself some more time? There's not a one size fits all right answer for everybody here, but considering your particulars, you want to think about which one would allow you to both be certain law school is your path and also give yourself more time to study. Alyssa in the comments says, I'm taking a gap year right now. Don't do it for real. Unless you're like me, I don't like being home. So yeah, if you're going to be living at home with your parents while you're taking that gap year, maybe that makes it a bit less appealing, in which case you just want to stay out of the house, take the LSAT, move on. That's a fair point as well. I see Tina says, I just took my LSAT and I seemed to run out of time on every single section. Any tips for next time? So I guess the question here is, how do you get faster at the LSAT? I mean, you get faster by increasing your familiarity, deepening your understanding. So this comes back to the pattern recognition, right? So the more you recognize the patterns, the faster you'll be able to solve the questions, because when you see a new question, you will have the familiarity with both the topics, surface level, and also the underlying patterns of methods of reasoning, for example, patterns in the tricks and traps. And so when you see a new question, you'll be able to solve it faster because you will have the muscle memory of having seen many questions like it in the past. And that's one way that you can solve questions faster, is when you've done dozens of similar ones. So you will be able to automatically and even perhaps subconsciously relate it back to ones you've done before. So more exposure through drilling, through timed sections, through full exams. There are literally 8,000 questions on LSAC's Law Hub platform. Roughly 6,000 of them are in the numbered practice tests, numbered 101 to 159. Then you also have drill sets. You also have individual timed sections that you could do separately. Plenty of material available to you to study from and master. Now, you don't have to do all of it, of course, but even if you did just a couple thousand, that would be more than enough. And if your accuracy is high untimed, as you're indicating here, you're saying you're at 170s untimed, that's great. That means accuracy is good, timing is the part that needs some work. So you can transition now from doing untimed drilling to more timed sections, work on your pacing, work on your time management, no more drilling, instead a lot more individual sections. How are you allocating your time over the course of this section? Are you doing the easy questions faster to build up a time bank for the tougher ones that are going to come later? And when you see a tougher question, can you avoid getting bogged down or stuck in the quicksand? Can you flag it? Can you skip it? Can you come back later? In other words, can you pass the LSAT's test of self-control, recognizing when you're getting bogged down, getting yourself unstuck by saying to yourself, you know what? I don't want to deal with this question in the moment. I'm just going to flag it and I'll circle back later. Every question on the LSAT is worth the same. Every question is worth one raw score point. So there's no reason to spend too much time on any one question, especially at the expense of the others that are going to come later. And we also got to look at when you're taking it, right? Because if you're taking it in 6 months or 7 months, you've got more than enough time to work on pacing, time management, and full exams. If your LSAT's coming up in just 2 months for April or 4 months for June, we've got to quickly get you into full exams. So I need more information, ideally, in order to give you more personalized recommendations. And so if you want to book the free tutoring lesson with me, we can meet personally one-on-one, and we could talk through your particulars, your situation. I can give you better advice with more context. You could book the free LSAT lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Links in my bio, open offer to everyone watching this, by the way, now or later. And folks, if you're just joining, I do these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. If you find them helpful, please spread the word, share this to your socials. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during them. So I really do appreciate your support, spreading the word, sharing it in your Discords, group chats, Facebook groups, and so on. Appreciate it. Just scanning through the chat here for more questions. Keep them coming. Lily's asking, how long does it take to hear back from law schools after you're submitting your application? Well, that certainly is the question this cycle more than ever. Law schools are taking longer and longer and longer to get back to applicants. So you could apply in September and not hear back for several months. Law schools just wait on applicants to see who else is going to come along. It's not polite. It's not right, especially when you put in all that work on your essays and also paid them a fee. The least they could do is give you an update, right? But they don't, because they hold all the cards. The power's in their hands, and they want to see if another stronger applicant will come along later, in which case they would give them the admission, not you, right? So what you want to do is ideally apply with really strong numbers, so they will be scared to lose you to another school, and then they will just want to admit you sooner so that you don't choose a different school. In other words, you have more leverage and you become a hotter commodity when you have stronger numbers. So if your LSAT score and your GPA are both above the law school's 75th percentile, you are not only likely to get in, but also get scholarship money and also hear back sooner. If you are a splitter where your LSAT is above median, but your GPA is below, then maybe you'll get in, maybe not, and you'll probably wait a while. And if your numbers are both below the LSAT and the GPA median, then you are unlikely to get in, and maybe they'll tell you sooner, but it's not an answer that you're going to like. So think about where your GPA is relative to a given law school's median, then that gives you more reason to shoot for a higher LSAT score. And of course, the answer is always to shoot for a higher LSAT, because that's always going to put you in a better position and not only get you in, but also get you more scholarship money, whether your GPA is good or not. And for reference, folks, I see folks are asking about, is this school or that school, am I likely to get in based on this or that LSAT score? And for the top 14 law schools, their GPA medians are all roughly a 3.9 because grade inflation is ridiculous. And so you want to have, if your GPA is below 3.9, you want to have above LSAT to median LSAT to compensate. Thing is, their LSAT medians are all 170 to 174. And so to Evelyn's question here, is a 167 a good LSAT for Chicago? Probably not, to be frank, because Chicago is a top 14 law school and their GPA median, their LSAT median is a 170 to 174. So your LSAT would be below their median, meaning you want to have above a 3.9 GPA just to be a reverse splitter with a low LSAT high GPA. But you're probably not going to raise your GPA significantly if you're already a junior or a senior in college, or you've already graduated, of course. And so the biggest thing you could do is, again, raise your LSAT score. If you can apply with above a 174, you'll have a much better chance of getting into Chicago or any other school. Michael's asking, what if you have a 3.2 GPA, but a 170 LSAT? Well, a 3.2 GPA, unfortunately, is way below the GPA median for the vast majority of law schools, unfortunately, because there are a lot of folks who majored in the humanities in classes where they would get easy A's, and so they are outcompeting you on the GPA front. In other words, it's not that hard to have a 3.8 GPA or a 3.9 GPA because you just take easy A classes, and many folks have discovered that and done that. In contrast, if you majored in a STEM field, a lot harder to have a high GPA. You might have been punished accordingly, and if you took classes where there was actually a curve. And that's not your fault because you challenged yourself, but it is your fault because you didn't try to game the system like they might have. And so as a result, your GPA is subpar. You need a higher LSAT to compensate. So you could be a splitter with a 170 LSAT. The question is, which schools are you looking at? Because every school has different LSAT medians, different GPA medians. And so the answer is always the annoyingly lawyerly answer, it depends. It depends on which schools you're targeting. Now, there are roughly 200 ABA-approved law schools, and so forgive me for not knowing the stats for all of them off the top of my head, but you can look these up very easily. You just Google Harvard Law School 509 or Yale Law School 509, and you will see the American Bar Association 509 reports for every single ABA-approved law school. You'll see their LSAT medians, their GPA medians, as well as their 25th percentile and 75th percentile numbers, and you'll see what kind of numbers they have by default and see what you need to be competitive. Now I see Evelyn's asking about, what about with a 4.0 GPA and lots of research and intern experience? So 4.0 GPA definitely helps. Of course, that puts you slightly above GPA medians, but you'll still be a reverse splitter. And so you might want to retake the LSAT, get a higher score just to be more competitive. As for research experience, internship experience, it's nice to have. It's context. You can put it on your resume, talk about it in your essays, but the law school admissions process is a lot more numbers driven than undergrad admissions. And so I don't want you to over-index on the softs, the work experience, the volunteer work and internships and so on. It doesn't play that much of a role. It's nice to have, of course, better to have it than to not have it, but you'll do a lot more for yourself by just retaking the LSAT than focusing a lot on the soft factors. And Alyssa, we personalize every program for the individual student. We like to offer you a more comprehensive program to get you from your current score to your goal score on your time frame. And so if you want to talk through the particulars of what a personalized LSAT plan could look for you, the best next step is to book the free LSAT tutoring with me through the link in my bio, and we can talk through the specifics here. I see Jasmine's asking about, how about applying to law school after being in public service for 2 years? Awesome, great. I mean, being in public service is great, and you could definitely talk about that in your application essays, highlight it in your resume, your work experience and such. You will definitely want to talk about that. And if it relates to law, of course, you want to mention that connection so that you can show law schools that you have some real world exposure to the practice of law beyond the pop culture portrayals of it, like in Suits, for example. But the number one thing you can do to boost your odds of admission is to have an LSAT above the 75th percentile of the schools you're targeting to help them boost their stats. Just scanning through the chat here for more questions, keep them coming. Blueberry's asking about when the LSAT is, when you can take the LSAT. So the LSAT is offered 8 times per year. In the first half of this year, it was offered in January, February. Coming up, it's offered in April and June. LSAC has not yet published the test dates for the second half of 2026, but we can expect, if it's anything like last year, it's going to be offered in August, September, October, and November. So they offer it 8 times a year, 4 in the first half of the year, 4 in the second half of the year. And the cool thing is that there's always another LSAT coming up in another month or two. And so if you need to retake, there are plenty of retake opportunities. So you could take it in April for your first take, June for your second take, or if you need more time, take it in June for your first take and August for your second take. And I love the latter plan there because you can still take it in August for your retake and apply as soon as apps open in September. And by the way, applying earlier is better than applying later, all else being equal, because when you apply earlier, there's more scholarship money available. It's easier to get in. And so it's, for those of you planning ahead, you're going to get rewarded for that. But for those of you who are applying now with your February LSAT results, it's also not too late for this cycle. There are still seats available, still plenty of scholarship money available, and it's better to apply a bit later if you need to with a higher score than earlier with a lower score. So ultimately, applying with the score that is the highest possible is what matters the most. And law schools will not penalize you for retaking the LSAT. So if your score was low and you're taking it again, totally fine. Law schools have no incentive to care about how many times you take it because they are not evaluated based on that metric. However, they are evaluated based on the highest score that you apply with. And so there's no downside to retaking the LSAT. If you need to retake for a higher score, retake for a higher score. I see Rush is asking, I have a 144 LSAT and have a private tutor. 3.6 GPA, not sure why I keep struggling. So as Alyssa says, maybe it wasn't a good tutor. Maybe you've plateaued and need to take a break. Could be fair. I mean, if you have a 144 LSAT, the good news is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, a lot of untapped potential. We've just got to unlock it. But it's a lot easier to go from a 144 to a 165 than to go from a 154 to a 175, right? So when you're at a 144, to be frank, there are a lot of foundational gaps. And so that means there's going to be a lot of quick wins, a lot of easy, low-hanging fruit. And so if you were a student in our programs, I'd want to do a diagnostic and see what are your biggest weak areas. They're going to be the quickest wins in the high yield areas. So for example, the three most common types of logical reasoning questions are necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. So I would start there. And my guess is that if you're at a 144, there's probably some major glaring mistake that you're making or gap in your understanding or approach for one of those three question types. If we can plug that hole, you'll probably get a pretty quick score boost. I would start with those question types rather than the rare ones that hardly ever come up, like evaluate the argument, or, for example, everybody hates parallel reasoning questions, but the good news is that there are not that many of them. Of course, for a top score, you do want to understand everything, but I would not start with a hard question type that's also rare. I would start with an easier question type that's a lot more common because you'll get a lot more bang for your buck, a lot more return on that investment, focusing your time there. We could also look at your reading comprehension approach, since that's an entire third of the test, and people often neglect that because you can't drill reading comp as easily as you can drill logical reasoning. But the thing is that it's not enough to get the questions right anyway. You got to get them right under test day conditions. And so, again, I would start with logical reasoning. We have necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. I'd also look at reading comp as well. And if you want to talk through what your personal study plan could look like, Rush, you can book the free tutoring lesson with me. Links in my bio, links below the video as well. It's unpluggedprep.com/start. Open offer for everybody watching this now or later. I see Asantu's asking, if I don't get in this cycle, I'm going to wait for 2027. I got a 145 the first time. I currently have a 3.5 GPA. Okay, so I mean, 145 first time, no big deal. All that tells you is that you haven't yet learned the material, but of course you can. There is no penalty for retaking the LSAT, and you could take it 5 times in 5 years, so it's very hard to hit those retake limits, and you have 8 times per year for the LSAT available as open test dates. So you could take it in June or August or even September and still apply this cycle, give yourself another at-bat, and with 4 months or 6 months or more, you've got plenty of time to improve your score 20 points or more, get a score that's worth applying with to offset the 3.5 GPA. If you need to wait a cycle, you can wait, but I don't think that you actually need to. And June gives you a solid 4 months. I see you're taking it in June. That's plenty of time to improve, and you could book a call with me if you want to talk through particulars there. I see Kai's asking, do you recommend being a paralegal first before being a lawyer? I'll say this. I wouldn't go out and become a paralegal to try and get into law school as a necessary stepping stone. But if you are already a paralegal, that's great. You could talk about it in your essays, highlight it on your resume, and show them that you understand what law is actually like, what law firm like can actually be like. But I wouldn't go out and become a paralegal just for law school purposes. That time is better spent just studying for the LSAT, getting a higher score. Shadia is asking, tips on the personal statement. Is using metaphors in your personal statement okay? Using a metaphor is not, I'm not going to say there's a blanket ban on using metaphors or similes or anything else that you learned in English class, but the question is, why are you using it? Are you using unnecessarily flowery language to communicate a point? Because, I mean, this is not poetry. This is not a creative writing exercise. A personal statement is a very specific type of essay meant to communicate to law schools something about yourself that they're not able to get from other areas of your application. You want to get them to like you, get them to see a more human side of yourself that the numbers can't communicate. And ideally, somewhere in your application, you want to communicate why you're going to law school, why you're pursuing this, why this is a natural next step for you. Doesn't have to be in your personal statement specifically, but if you're not communicating that idea or reason elsewhere, the personal statement is a good place to communicate it. But just as any topic could potentially be good for a personal statement, a metaphor could be appropriate for a personal statement. The question's in how you execute it. And so definitely show your essay to someone else, get some feedback on it to make sure that you're going about it the right way. We do offer editing services from editors with admissions experience in our program, but we always recommend starting with the LSAT first, locking in your score. In other words, if you have not yet hit your goal score on the LSAT, I wouldn't even be thinking about the personal statement yet. Don't get distracted from the LSAT with the essays. Don't procrastinate from the LSAT by talking essays. Lock in the LSAT score first and foremost. Just scanning through here for more questions. Keep them coming, folks. Azam's asking, I have a 3.3 GPA, 158 LSAT. Should I try to get a higher score and apply next year instead? I'll say as a general rule that those stats are probably not going to be sufficient to get you into a law school worth going to with a sufficient degree of scholarship money, just being frank about it. If you look at what your chances are at different law schools and what kind of scholarship offers you're likely to get, because the GPA is a bit on the lower side, you're going to want to offset that with a relatively higher LSAT score. So I'd be aiming for at least 165, 170 minimum to offset the 3.3 GPA. So I would recommend retaking the LSAT. And if you mean applying next year, if you're talking about like taking it in April or June or August and applying this fall to start law school fall 2027, that's probably the move I would recommend, just given those stats. But the good news is you got plenty of time to improve, to retake, to get a higher score. And so if you want to talk through what that prep plan could look like, I'm happy to talk through particulars. I see Tamer's asking, I have a 3.8 GPA and a 165. Where should I apply? I mean, there's 200 ABA approved law schools, and they're across all 50 states, right? So I can't tell you where you should live and what state you should live, whether it should be urban or suburban or rural. I guess the question is, where do you want to practice law? Where do you want to live? Those are big life questions. I can't answer those for you. If you want to narrow it and ask, where do you think you'd be competitive? And if you want to say, I want to go to a top 30 law school in a major city, where might I be competitive? Because you're saying, I want to stay in Chicago. That narrows things severely because there's 200 ABA approved law schools. How many of them are in the city limits of Chicago or within reasonable commuting distance? Probably fewer than 10, I'm guessing, right? So I would start with which law schools are in Illinois and then work backwards from there. And you can just do a narrowed search with your constraints of GPA and LSAT, and you'll probably be able to see, okay, these are within the city, within the region of Chicago, there's, I don't know, 7 law schools and 2 reaches, 3 targets, 2 safeties. There you have it. It might be that simple. You also want to look at when I say where do you want to practice, I mentioned that because certain states, you go to law school there, they will prepare you for a certain state bar. And so you wouldn't want to go to law school in California if you don't want to live in California afterwards and you don't want to practice in California. Same for New York. Certain states have their own state bars. Certain states just have the uniform bar exam only. And so you want to go to a law school that will prepare you for the state bar where you want to practice. But just do some research, just narrow your search to your state, and you're going to be good. I see Frados is asking, what do you recommend for breaks from studying when studying full-time from the LSAT, from burnout, or maybe from trying overwhelming yourself, from too much info at once? And so I guess what you're asking here is you're studying a lot, you're running the risk of burnout, you don't want to overwhelm yourself with too much information, and you're studying for the LSAT full-time. So when you're studying for the LSAT full-time, you want to maximum study for the LSAT 5 to 6 hours per day. Anything more than that is a recipe for burnout. You also want to give yourself a day or 2 off per week. The LSAT is not a test that you can cram for. It's not a memorization test. It's a test of skill building, pattern recognition, and it takes time to let the lessons of your studying sink in. So 1 or 2 days off per week, max 5, maybe 6 hours per day, 5 or 6 days a week. Block off time on your calendar, block off time in your schedule, both for LSAT as well as non-LSAT things. You want to maintain good quality of life so that you're feeling fresh, you have good energy. So your sleep schedule, your diet, your relaxation, exercise, sleep meaning 7-8 hours a day, ideally not studying for the LSAT after 11 p.m. or midnight. Ideally, you are eating well, not just eating fast food and delivery every single day. Get outside here and there a little bit, get some fresh air, get some sunlight, some time for relaxation. Could be meditation, could be prayer, could be just going for a walk, getting some time in nature, seeing friends. All of that really helps. If you're only in front of screens all the time or only working all the time, your brain needs a reset, needs a rest. And so I recommend giving yourself some time off from the LSAT here and there, getting some time outdoors here and there. I know it's been cold lately for most of us. And so if it's warming up a little bit, hopefully getting outside, maybe just in the heat of the day, a little bit, going to the park can really do a lot to reset you and let the patterns and the lessons of your studying sink in. But contrary to the popular opinion these days, we are not machines, we're biological beings. And so we need some time in fresh air, we need some time away from the screens and such. So give yourself that. LSAT prep is really a marathon. It's not a sprint. It takes time. And so you need breaks from it every now and then as well. So if you're cramming it, maybe you said to yourself, do I need to take the LSAT this upcoming test date so soon? Or can you afford to give yourself a break here and there? If you're applying this fall anyway, you may not need to rush it for April. You might be better off taking it in June, giving yourself some more time. April gives you only 2 months. June gives you 4 months. You're doubling your study duration, and you still have a backup test date in June. You still have a backup test date probably in August as well, and you'll be able to apply as soon as applications open in the fall. And if you want to talk through what your study plan could look like, feel free to book the free LSAT tutoring with me. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. And Seymour, I'm glad you're finding these helpful. Awesome. I see Ria's asking, are we hiring? I scored a 170 plus and would love to join. Yeah, feel free to reach out if you have teaching experience, if you love the LSAT, if you're passionate about it, if you want to help others succeed on it as well. Feel free to shoot me a DM. I'll be happy to talk you through next steps. We are hiring, looking for more top scorers with teaching experience. Happy to have that conversation. Thanks for reaching out. Let's see, other questions here coming in. Thanks for all these. Travis is asking, what are some possible reasons for those scoring significantly lower on test day than in their practice tests? That's a fantastic question. Unfortunately, a lot of students do drop on average 5 to 8 points from their practice test to the actual exam. There are a variety of reasons for that. Could be bad proctor, could be tech issues, could be nerves, could be anxiety, could be a failure to properly simulate test day conditions. So if you took the January LSAT, for example, and your score came back 5 to 8 points lower, you want to think through each one of those potential factors and think, what can you correct for next time around so that your score will not drop? Or maybe can you raise your baseline so that if you wanted a 170 on test day, maybe you want your practice test average going in to be a 175 so that you've got a buffer. And then are there ways you can mitigate the likelihood or risk of tech issues? Can you do a system check on your personal computer before test day to make sure that it can properly run the Prometric software? Can you make sure your webcam and microphone are working? Can you clean up the background behind you so the proctor's not going to have issues with that poster on your wall that has the contrapositive formulas laid out on it or anything like that? Can you make sure that your internet connection is strong? Can you maybe take the LSAT in person at a testing center so that none of this will even be an issue? Can you work on your sympathetic nervous system to avoid stress? In other words, can you reduce your nerves and anxiety? Can you do mindfulness meditation focusing on your breath for just 5 minutes a day? So if something does go sideways, you can course correct and bring your heart rate back to baseline. there are a lot of things you can do to mitigate these drops. And part of it just comes down to, again, thinking through worst case scenarios, taking steps to prevent those from occurring, and then preventing your negative response if they do occur anyway. People also experience drops because they didn't properly simulate test day conditions. And so if your test day is going to be two 35-minute sections back to back, a 10-minute break, then two more 35-minute sections back to back, which is the official timing. But then your practice tests, you're pausing the clock throughout to go to the bathroom, get a snack, talk to your roommate. If you're taking one section per day for 4 consecutive days and adding it up, that is not a full exam because you're not testing your endurance. You want to train your endurance so that you're not fatigued by section 4 just because it is section 4. You also, for the same reason, you can't do 100 individual questions one by one on your phone in line for coffee throughout the week and add those up and call those an exam because you're not working on pacing either. So test day is a very unique environment that tests not just your accuracy, but also your pacing and your time management, as well as your endurance and your stamina. And so you got to train each of these things individually, which is why at LSAT Unplugged, we craft a study plan for you where you're doing at least 10 to 15 timed exams under strict conditions so that test day itself will be like just another run through and you've done it all before. You've worked on your pacing, you've worked on your endurance, not just drilling. Too many students fall into the trap of just drilling and drilling and drilling because they love the instant feedback. They love studying on their phones, but test day is not a drill and it's not on your phone either. It's a full sitting that really tests your focus. And so you've got to build up that muscle. And I'll tell you, social media does not help with that. So we got to train your focus like a muscle to counteract muscles that may have atrophied because you've been doing questions one by one. So we gradually build it up from individual questions to full timed 35-minute sections, and then beyond that to full-length timed exams doing 4 sections in one sitting for 2.5 hours, which is not easy, of course. And the first one doesn't go that well typically, which is why you do a dozen of them, so that little by little, each one's better than the one that came before it. So by test day, it's easy. That is possible. It actually can become easy over time with the right prep. So Ryan says, what like it's hard? Exactly. So by the end of it, it actually will not feel that hard because you've done it so many times before. And if you'd like my help getting to that point where it actually feels easy, where you can get a 179 like Elle Woods, where it becomes a process that you can master and own, I'm happy to help you out. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons, private one-on-one for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free lesson with me privately is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. Please spread the word. I do appreciate your support. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for joining.